All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. I'm gonna start us off with a prayer, and then I'll introduce our speaker and get going. Father God, thank you so much for these people who love you, love your word, and love to know more about you. And thank you for these people who know that science is part of your creation. And Lord, bless us tonight, give everybody safe travels when they leave here. And thank you for getting everybody here safely. And thank you for the people online. In Jesus Christ, I'm pray. Amen. All right, this is Mark Tabladillo, often known as Mark Tab, because nobody can pronounce his last name. But he is going to talk to us tonight about the historical Adam, which I think is very interesting because I thought Adam was prehistoric. Just saying.
Prehistoric. That's that's interesting comment. I'll talk about that.
So I am going to turn, if anybody has any questions for him, do you want them to hold them to the end or do you want them to ask them when they?
We'll probably be talking back and forth during the presentation.
Okay.
So
I'm turning things over to you.
okay, good. Thanks. Okay, glad to be here. I am I'm one of our officers for Reasons to Believe. I haven't shown up at a lot of meetings. It seems like Thursday night's a very popular night. In fact, I'm skipping out on our monthly Ratio Christi call to be here tonight. My main ministry, as far as, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I have been an officer of the club for some years. And I started coming to RTB this chapter 2009. And what happened, I'll give you some context. God had put on my heart to understand more about apologetics because I had a lot of friends who were atheists, agnostics. I always grew up with a theistic worldview, and so did a lot of the kids I knew. They might not have been Christians, but they were theists. And so it was not really a pursuit to get anything specific answered, but just to understand atheism and agnosticism. And as part of that journey, I joined this club. I also, same year, 2009, I think Jeffrey Bashir's, I started going to his class, and then also coming here to William Lane Craig's Defenders class, which met in this building, right across there. He's still meeting there. So it's been a journey, and I just have a lot of respect for Dr. Craig. And I guess I was going to admit that I do give small donations to RTB, but I'm also donating to Reasonable Faith, and I'm also donating to Discovery Institute. We're going to be talking about all of them tonight. Okay, so just because you may have some disagreements doesn't mean I don't respect the body of the scholarship. And then some more about me. So what I do full time, I work for Microsoft, and I've been there for a number of years. I work in an area now that's gotten a lot of attention, which is artificial intelligence. And just in the last year, Microsoft released an engine called ChatGPT-4, which how many of you heard of that? Okay, I'm going to have to do another AI talk. I did an AI talk, but this is before that, so we'll put that on the calendar maybe for later. But I have been talking about AI in the last month, and mostly about ethics, right? So that's a little preview about that. And I work with some of our customers to build systems for AI. And AI is now the umbrella term for machine learning, data science, statistical analysis. All of that now is being marketed by Microsoft and all the other companies as AI. So to me, it's been an enjoyable, mostly enjoyable journey to work in high tech. And the joy I have, sometimes I have some substantial conversations at work about epistemology, or how do you know what's true? And you know what, now this topic all intersects with this topic here. So what happened was 7 years ago, it was like 2016, Fazale Rana came out with his revised book, Who Was Adam? And this was substantially revised. So he had done one book, and then I did it as an RTB topic, just to review that book. But there are some intersections now with this topic and even what I do with AI, because one of the big questions people are asking is, what is the nature of humanity? And that's kind of an open-ended, broad question now that's affecting our cultural discussion, legal discussion, and everything. So beyond just this book, as standing for a certain, view of scholarship, when we get to the end, we think about what the impact of this topic is. It is more than just about studying bones. I think there is some deeper questions on what does it mean to be human and how do we know the difference? And we have assertions in the Bible about what that means. Then we have also scientific artifacts. Okay, so we're going to talk about all that body of evidence. And do we know everything? No. So I think humbly about this whole topic because someone was asking about my doctorate. Was from Georgia Tech, industrial engineering. And one thing that I have done over the years, sometimes I get involved in some academic work. I was talking with Richard Howe. He was on a presentation I had attended in the last month for dissertation defense. There's a woman named Kristen Davis who has now earned her doctorate from Southern Evangelical Seminary. And the reason I was on the committee was because she was writing about artificial intelligence doesn't lead to atheism. And I enjoy, I enjoy intellectual topics. And I would say even more than a lot of my social friends who don't come to these meetings and have not consistently in 10 years. And I tell them I'm here, it's like, no, whatever, Mark, okay. And you find yourself always, and you know what? God's made us different people. And I begin to think about not just intelligent design, but I also think about the specific design of our lives. And especially as all of us get older, you begin to see how God has impacted and built our life a certain way, right? And it's distinct and it's different. And I think it's beautiful. And I think also as I learn how God is doing things, to me, it's really amazing. So I see God as someone who's active and involved in the world. That is a worldview topic, well, very much related to this entire topic. Okay, so here's our abstract. We're going to talk about some of the controversial claims from this book, and some of the claims are at odds with what Dr. Rana has published in his own extensive study, Who Was Adam? So the book came out previously.
Is that, I haven't seen yet it identified as to who wrote the book that you're.
William Lane Craig.
All right.
Yeah. So William Lane Craig, so let me tell you about who wrote this book. So Craig has written a number of big books. And what is amazing about this book is there are only a few authors who can get a publisher to publish a book of that length. And I'm not talking about self-publishing. I mean, you go to a publisher and you want to, send them a book, they might cut it. And I just made a friendship with Doug Groteis, who teaches at Denver Seminary. He just wrote a book on critical theory. He said he had to throw out like 1/3 of his manuscript. They just wouldn't do it. They gave him a limit. He thought, I'm going to write beyond it. They said, well, sorry, you're still at that limit. So, but he's been able to do that because he's published some large books in the past. He's a known author, and so publishers will take a chance and publish something that long. This is actually a combination of notes that so this is actually the summary. He was teaching this material in his defenders class. How many of you have, I went to some of those sessions. I didn't go to all of them. Some of us maybe have gone to some. I think they're all recorded, so they're all available. But then you also have the book itself, which is kind of where he landed. And in a lot of his lectures, he'll go and he'll talk about certain ideas. He'll present different aspects. And then typically what he does, and he does this in his systematic theology, he'll come up with the one he likes the best. In other words, I think as a routine, and I've sat through several of his presentations in systematic theology, I don't think he ever gets to the end of a topic and doesn't take a position. You see what I'm saying? Now, me personally, there are some topics I don't have a position. I will describe positions. I won't even hint at what I think a most probable position. I just don't take a position. So again, I think this is a difference in people. And those of you who have known his material, does that resonate as true? That he does take positions pretty much in everything he talks about? Yeah, okay, I think I see some nodding heads. So there, I mean, there are scholars that will say this question is unknown and then just leave something undone. So as we get into this book, that again is his approach. He's going to take positions on everything he's talking about, right? Not going to leave anything where he doesn't have a viewpoint. So I'm drawing on some analysis from Fazale Rana. He's done a few things. He wrote a white paper. If you go to the RTB website. Now, what I like about Fuzz is he made it his short. Okay, so his paper is only like 20 pages PDF, but he got to the point, he knew what he wanted to say, even though his Who Was Adam book was also a big book. He didn't come back to analyze the big book with yet another big book. And what I want to accomplish tonight, I just want to hit certain themes that I thought were important. I am not going to do a summary of the book, but I'm going to hit the themes that I think are important to talk about in light of, Thomas Howe, Dr. Howe, his analysis. There's also so Casey Luskin is with Discovery Institute. I'm going to bring in some of his ideas. And then there's another scholar that both Luskin and Rana cite, which is John Oswald. John Oswald wrote a whole book on myths in the Old Testament.
Wrote a book on what?
Myths, MYFTHS. And he's also done interview. So Joe Miller interviewed Oswald after this book came out. So I'm pointing you to things that if you want to follow up to what these folks have to say, you can do that.
So the John Oswald book, that's the one I gave the presentation on last month.
Excellent. Okay, so just go back to Eric's presentation. All right. Excellent. All right, here's my outline. Agreement, disagreement, application. All right, pretty simple. So agreement, I like this because, right now you go to PowerPoint. By the way, AI is going to be in all the Office products. So today, like if you type a slide, it's going to suggest things that have to do with the words on the slide. You might not like it, but you don't have to choose. But anyway, that's what happened. Uh-oh, let's see. All right, just make sure I didn't shake this. Okay, so points of agreement. And again, these are not all the points of the agreement. Okay, I'm just giving you a sample. I'm not and by the way, so just because there's only so many, I'm not implying there's only 4 points of agreement. I'm just saying these are the main ones. Go ahead.
You're talking about agreement between Dr. Craig
and Rana specifically. Rana specifically. All right, Adam and Eve are historical people. And Paul was definite on Adam being a person. And if you read the scholarship, there's some debate about whether or not the Gospels are definite about Adam, meaning Jesus Christ. But as far as I'm concerned, it's enough for me to say Paul is definite on Adam, and then I end it there. Who would want to challenge that? All the scholars that have these ideas about Jesus and Paul being two different viewpoints. Okay, and if those of you who have studied New Testament, there's people out there trying to make a case of trying to show the differences between Jesus and Paul. Well, first of all, anyway, Jesus and Paul are two different people as people, but Jesus is also God. All right, so I always come from the viewpoint that because Jesus is God, it's interesting academic topic, but still God authored the Bible, and that to me that's enough of an answer. Okay, Genesis 1 to 11 is part of the Bible. I added that point just because I think the way the scholarship is going on this topic, I think I'm even early anticipating we're going to see people that are going to challenge that. Now, why they stop at 11, I don't know. As you know, Genesis 12, first of all going back to Bible scholarship 101, all the chapter headings and verse headings were added later in the Bible. These were all originally scrolls, and they were all written out, Old Testament and New Testament. So Genesis 12 is key because of Abraham. And it starts then, with the promise that about the redemption of all mankind. In fact, an important verse there because it launches the entire modern missions movement. I've often taught Bible on that first. Why is Genesis 12 important for the entire Bible? But going back to Genesis 1:11, they say it is part of the Bible. All right, without getting into details. The next thing, Rana agrees that image of God is structural. There's different ways to think about image of God. This word structural is something people have applied, and that means that we share certain capabilities with God. Again, not getting into details. I'm not an expert on these topics. And then the fourth one there, the origin of man is an important topic. So again, Rana wrote his own book, and so he's got a viewpoint that going into these details, he thought were sufficiently important for him to release as his own research.
Have anything to say on the vocational perspective of the image of God as opposed to certain capabilities that we share with God, that it's our mission or our telos or purpose that is the image of God, that we are image bearers, I guess?
Right, and there's one that's like representative. I don't know if that's the same one.
Yeah, image
Now-
bearer is representative of God.
When I was reading this, okay, this is one where I don't have a viewpoint. I think because that's true, I think they're simultaneously true, but not in a way that challenges each other. So when we're talking about, different ways to think about the image of God, it's not like that replaces that.
Right.
And
But I
trying to
can
pick
see
number
that-
one.
I can see that serving our vocation, that we need those things in order to be representative of God. So one is kind of,
I know, but I wouldn't even, I have a problem even hierarchically saying, because when we describe, who we are in terms of language, we're all like one thing. And so to me, and again, I'm not saying that someone shouldn't make a case for why one's above the other. Give me your reasons why you think one's above the other, or why they can be together. Right now, so I know Rana took a position on this, and when I first read that, I thought, you know what? I would take a position on that. I think image of God means all these things. And I'll tell you why. Part of the reason I lean that way is all the names of God. How many names of God are there in the Bible? And you say, okay, which one's the best one? Elohim. No, Yahweh. Yahweh is number one. Like whole religions are named after Yahweh. So it's like all the other ones, no, they don't count. So then you get to this hierarchical thing. But I look at them all as revelations. And then when I think about the life as a Christian, I think about how God reveals to us who we are. So even beyond just the category, like we can say structural for everybody. Okay, well, how does that land on specific people? To me, it gets very personal at a certain point, and then it gets into spiritual gifts. So that's for all these reasons. I think I would not land more specific. Now, later on, this is going to be important, as you'll see as we tie this to a science discussion. So there's a science aspect to this that becomes important. So just hold on to that thought right now. Okay, so the origin of man is an important topic. All right, good. And by the way, man, I mean men and women, because we're recording. And by the way, I mean men and women only. I know it's crazy, right? Pam's laughing. All right, this is what Microsoft gave me for the disagreement. And you know what? What I like about this slide is it reminds me of the humility. We really need to think of ourselves as pawns. Why not? Why not just be humble? Everybody's got the doctorates. Everybody's written the books. This whole cast has scholarship that they're going to present. But at the end of the day, we don't know all the answers here. Okay, so we only are going to present what do we know. And I think part of the Christian worldview, now there are philosophies out there, I can't know anything or I don't know anything. That's not the Christian worldview. Christian worldview is we can know things, we can know truths, and we can be sure about them, right? Does that mean that we become or that we need to become omniscient? And the answer is no. So this is, again, just ideas from the Christian worldview as we're getting into this that I think should be restated, right? Restated. Now, these authors, they're not going to say things like what I just said in their book because, they're already assuming kind of a body of knowledge. I'm not so sure that we don't need to restate some of these things. I'm just saying seems like we're at a point now where people want to challenge some fundamental ideas from worldview.
Mark, it appears that you're muted.
He's not muted.
You're not muted. Something happened.
I'm not muted.
Okay,
Can you hear
okay,
me?
when you turned around and looked at the screen, we can't hear you online, I think is what happened.
Okay. Okay, face the owl.
Maybe you can stand over here.
No, I'll just face it. I'm good. I'll be good.
All right.
I can see the two eyes. It's got two eyes right here. It's looking at me.
That's the
This is to remind me.
It should.
It's helpful. Okay, I know. Al's looking at me. All right, so following Dennis Alexander, we may distinguish three ways in which the word concordism has been used. One, the attempt to extract modern scientific information from scriptural passages. For example, taking Genesis 1:1 to teach Big Bang cosmology. Two, the attempt to interpret scriptural texts in light of modern science. For example, day, age, and gap interpretations of Genesis 1. And three, the attempt to integrate the independently discovered findings of contemporary science and biblical theology into a synoptic worldview. All right, so the first one is you have from the Bible to cosmology. All right, the second one is you start with science and then you come to the Bible. And then the third one is the attempt to integrate the independently discovered findings of contemporary science in the Bible to put into a synoptic worldview. And I don't have the passage open. I do believe that Craig was saying do three, number three. And by the way, in saying number two, he took a swipe at day, age, and gap interpretation. And when I was formerly in my cult, which is a whole other chapter of my life, we did believe in what's called the gap theory. How many of you have heard of the gap theory? Okay, right. So, and we won't go into it. Day, age is obviously held by Hugh Ross, but not all the RTB scholars. And now here's the thing. None of the people I read, or maybe I missed it, latched onto this quote, because to me, this is where Craig's philosophical foundation is coming from. When do you go to science and when do you go to biblical theology? I'm thinking there are certain things in the Bible that are irrefutably true, even if it doesn't have a science message. Just like what I was saying earlier, that there's truth, that there's facts that can be known. What I just said, you know, some of those ideas are important, or even like the nature of people. What is the nature of people? What is the soul? The Bible makes a case for these topics. And I believe, even though the topic of the soul is not a discussion about a bone, it's still, to me, foundation way of thinking. Once you come to believe that the biblical worldview is true, there's certain things that you take, and you don't come from a different worldview. Why this is important is because when you read Rana's assessment, and also Luskin said the same thing, Craig's coming from an evolutionary worldview. This is one of the major differences. So it's not just about science facts, it's also about worldviews. And why worldviews are so important? When I think of missionary work, when I think of the work I do with Ratio Christi, which is, apologetics, our whole battle is worldview. It's really not about facts. I don't know that we necessarily bring new facts to the table. Even what RTB does is not, to my knowledge, I don't know that RTB has necessarily produced original science. All they're doing is taking science that already exists and then explaining how that points to God in the Bible. And Discovery Institute may be producing some science. I think in some cases they have, because they have some scholars producing some peer-reviewed paper. And again, I'm not saying RTB hasn't, I'm just not aware of that. So here's the point. The point is, what does it mean to have your worldview? We're not going to completely answer that, but I'm pointing to that as a crux of the question. All right, witnesses. I was teaching on evidence for the resurrection, Bible study. and it was based on J. Warner Wallace. And as you know, or may know, in his description of evidence for the resurrection, he talks about direct evidence and indirect evidence. So direct evidence has to do with who was there, who said so that something happened. If they saw it happen, like the evidence of the resurrection, they are higher, you get it? And then what is indirect? And even when I gave this to an audience, I mean, they were not even just able to say, what is indirect evidence? A lot of things are indirect. DNA, blood, the knife, whatever, anything having to do with the homicide, that's all indirect evidence. The direct evidence is all the witnesses. So the major challenges to the evidence of the resurrection have to do with challenging the witnesses. Are the witnesses reliable? And there's whole, that's what Wallace does in his analysis, and he's not the only one. What I'm talking about now, I didn't see in this on all the analysis I read, but I wanted to see, what does Craig say about the witnesses, right? And there's two witnesses. First, I'm going to talk about the snake, and then we're going to talk about the cherubim. And for the snake, so in the story of Garden of Eden, we have these multiple fantastic elements, wholly apart from God's anthropomorphic appearance. First and foremost, is noted by Gunkel, is a snake who not only talks, but is a conniving and malevolent agent. Although little interpretation of this figure might be purchased by taking the snake to be an incarnation of Satan or pagan deity, such an interpretation not only reads such a personage into this passage, but more importantly, seems implausible in light of the author's characterization of the snake or that. So,
Dr. Craig's words?
these are Dr. Craig's words. So this is quoted from Craig. So he thinks the snake is a fantastic element. In other words, it's so outrageous that it's probably a mythical thing. And whether or not it actually is a snake, actually, this is analyzed by Dr. Howe in his book. I didn't bring the quote, so I'm not going to tell you what he said, but he also picked up on the fact of this snake in his text. And to me, so this is going after the witness. Now, to me, I think the snake's an actual something, a person, an independent being who was a witness. Now, the snake might be a false witness, but it's a witness nonetheless. So why do I think this is important? Because, kill the witnesses, it's easier to walk around things. Go ahead.
I think it was a wild animal.
Possibly. So there's more scholarship in Dr. Howe's book, so I would recommend reading what he says, because he does a pretty good analysis of what the snake means in Craig versus his Hebrew scholarship. Okay, and I didn't snip that out.
It seems odd that you'd have a wild animal with human intelligence, but they weren't created specially or referenced in any other way. I mean, it's not just that a snake can talk, it's that it's so wildly intelligent.
Right.
To carry on that kind of, and to have a moral character.
Yeah, so no, I don't think it was a natural snake. I think it was more like a something looked like snakes. So let me get, all right, I'm gonna get my Bible. Hold on.
I might say something,
Go
I
ahead.
think the Bible says he was cursed and he became a snake. He crawled on his belly. So in other words, he wasn't quite a snake from the beginning, but he was talking to Adam and Eve, he had a different appearance. He actually became what we call a snake after
Okay.
he was cursed.
So Genesis 3:1, okay, now Howe mentioned this. So it says, the way it reads, now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. So the implication that it was not a beast of the field. That's what he makes in his argument. Now, again, I'm not a Hebrew scholar and I don't have his material open, but I'm not going to go further because I'm not an expert in this, but I do know he did a very good analysis of the snake. Okay, so let's talk just the snake. Craig thinks this is what he calls a fantastic element. Now, he starts going down this theme of fantastic elements that are, things that are probably myth. But how do you draw the line? How do you know it's a fantastic element versus how do you know it's a miracle?
Well, just one point, that there isn't, the Hebrew doesn't say more crafty than any other wild animal, as if the snake is an animal.
Correct.
It actually just says he was more crafty than any of the beasts.
Right. How made that point?
Yeah, that word other might not.
It's not in, it's not in, it's not
No.
in the text.
ESV,
I don't know what translation.
I read ESV, but how, I was, yeah, he made the point, it is not an animal. He said it's more crafty than any other. When it said any other animal, it's implying that
It was an
it's
animal.
not an animal. In original Hebrew, and he makes a case for that in the book, which I thought was a good thing, because again, the reason I think this is important is because this is a witness. For a different reason. All right. And so this is one of the themes in Craig's viewpoint about reading Genesis. What's fantastic and what's a miracle? Why is that even important to Christians? It's always zooming back to the same story I just told. Jesus Christ, what's fantastic and what's a miracle? And even though that's closer in time, perhaps, than the early accounts of Genesis, it's all one story. Christians are presenting the Bible as one story. Go ahead.
And your use of fantastic there means fantasy myth.
Fantasy myth, that's
Okay.
what Craig's claiming. Yes. Exactly. And by the way, pretty much everything he's come to as a conclusion is not first stated by him. He's drawing on people who have said this. And part of the back and forth in this long book, not just he said, he'll say where he got it from, right? But also Rana says where he got it from. And also Howe said, oh, because he got it from there. So we're not talking about something that's new. He's packaging together an argument toward one or more scholars that he agrees with on these different points. So again, I don't have the citations here. I would send people to the book to find out where he's getting it.
His definition of myth is not what we might popularly think of as myth, as it's false or something. It's folklorist view of myth, correct? That grounds
There,
current realities in the primordial past, and therefore it's just more figurative language in that particular genre is how he describes it.
he leans toward figurative language, and again, I'm probably not prepared to specifically defend that, because I started reading, the ways he's using the word myth. There was another author, so and we'll get to this on one slide. He makes the argument that Genesis 1 to 11 is something he's now calling mytho-history. And if you heard, Eric, did you talk about this mytho-history? I don't know what you talked about. I don't know.
I didn't talk about it as such. I did go through several different definitions for myth.
Okay.
I didn't talk specifically about Craig's. I haven't read his book yet, so I don't feel qualified to really comment. All I know is what I heard from sitting in his class a few times.
Okay,
But I did go through all of the definitions, all the different definitions of myth that Oswald talked about.
okay. I like Oswald's book, and I got a copy of it in Logos, and I also read part of that as part of the prep for this talk. It's a lot of books. All right, so let's just go on, because we want to make sure we get all the main points. So snake, now the cherubim. You know what? I love the cherubim. I think the cherubim are real. And again, this one's one that Howe talks about, so I'm not going to give you the counterpoint on this slide. All of these are like major conclusions, but to me, the only reason I'm bringing this up is I view the cherubim as witnesses. So this is Craig saying this. When God drives the man and wife out of the Garden of Eden, he stations at its eastern entrance the cherubim and flaming sword, which turned every way to guard the way of the tree of life. What makes this deal fantastic is that the cherubim were not thought to be real beings, but fantasies composed of a lion's body, a bird's wings, and a man's head. Nahum Sarna observes that the motif of composite human, animal, bird figures was widespread in various forms and arts and religious symbolism in the Fertile Crescent, and the biblical cherubim would seem to be connected with this artistic tradition. Now, again, I don't have Howe's counterpoint, but this whole line right here, composed of a lion's body, bird's wings, and man's head, he demonstrates why that's wrong. And I'm not going to go into it beyond that. I'm just going to tell you what Craig says on this point, because we need to move on. But
That is pretty fantastic.
Was a claim.
That the cherubim were not real.
Does he get that from Ezekiel or?
No, he told you, Nam Sarna. There's different scholars, and again, you'll have to follow the thread of how he got here, you will have to read the book. So I'm just giving you a conclusion, and I know that's not satisfying as far as studying.
The cherubim do have
Oh, yeah,
a different, they have a lion's face.
that's right.
and-
There's two places. So there's one describing it with one head, and then one head with four faces. So this if you want to, I think Howe's scholarship on this is better, and I should have brought books, I should be selling books. Y'all need to get Howe's book. On the scholarship about the cherubim, but the fact, he's making this argument, and it's not in this part, but the cherubim were part of, obviously on the ark, remember, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then they were depicted on the veil. So his argument was, because they're depicted on the veil, that proves they were not real, because they would have been doing idolatry if they were real. Like, what? But what about the ark itself being the throne of God? Is that real? No, I don't know. I'm just saying this is, and again, I'm not saying that any of this scholarship doesn't have some other backers. So we're not just talking about Craig, but he's bundling what he thinks are credible conclusions. All right, here's Craig. So cherubim filled multiple roles in biblical traditions, such as symbolizing God's presence or sovereignty. Artistic representations of such creatures were to be found in the tabernacle and the temple, including the Holy of Holies. Sarna points out they are the only pictorial representation permitted in an otherwise anti-iconic religion. They do not violate the prohibition against images because they are purely products of the human imagination, and so do not represent any existing reality in heaven and earth. Thus, images of them could be made in ancient Israel without breaking the second commandment, prohibiting images of things in heaven. And I'm gonna tell you what I don't even like about, and again, this is from Craig's book, purely products of human imagination. Not just products of the human imagination, as if God gave you some sort of vision and you described what you thought you saw. It says purely products, even though he quoted it. You see what I'm saying? Can't believe it.
C.S. Lewis makes the point that imagination is absolutely essential to faith because God is trying to tell us about things that we can't see or understand or fully understand.
Okay.
And so the fact that he would throw off on imagination as if it were imaginary.
Yes,
I
that's a
think
good
it
point. That's a good point. There's a difference between imagination and imaginary. So again, to your point, people will often maybe have an idea or imagination about what heaven's like, but that doesn't mean heaven is imaginary, right? And just because and again, throughout the Old Testament, how often have we seen movie depictions, right? Noah's Ark, or I don't care what the story is, latest movie about Abraham. So just because they are imaginations, does that mean that we believe necessarily they are imaginary events or things that didn't exist? So what I'm talking about now, yes, this is more than just a science topic. This is going to be about, epistemology. How do we know what we believe to be true? Did you want to say something? No? Okay. All right, original sin. So this is Howe. So this is from Howe's book. So Craig says, it is, however, dubious that the doctrine of original sin is essential to the Christian faith. How about that?
Well, that's what he means by that. I gotta know what he means by original sin.
Okay, it is curious that Craig does not reference any Protestant theologians, for example, Francis Turretin, Herman Babnik, Charles Hodge, Herman, and Soler, who were committed to the doctrine of original sin. So I think this is an important point. Again, I'm not trying to flesh out everything that Craig said on this topic. I'm bringing the points to this talk that I think are important to research. I think this is one that merits some research. What does he mean by that? And why did Howe critique that? Doctrine of original sin. Exactly what does it mean? But I think it doesn't hurt to talk about what that means. Original sin is obviously tied to Adam. And what you mean, and this is something I think Christians should know at some level without being, an expert in ancient archaeology or whatever. What does it mean that we claim that to be true about the first and the second Adam? See, this is now a theological thing for the New Testament. So some of this topic I think is important for Christians on an ongoing basis, or they're not become the science geeks and read all the, biological old stuff. Yes.
I do know Craig believes Adam brought sin and death into the whole world. So if that's what you mean by original sin, he believes that. He just doesn't believe in imputed guilt. He's not necessarily committed to the Adam corrupted human nature, but they were expelled from the garden perhaps, and that's why we sin.
Yeah.
So.
And I think it, as I understand it, it wasn't so much that, and Tom was like, well, you didn't quote me, those other people. I think what he's criticizing is Craig often or sometimes sets up a point that he just stipulates that is integral to the arguments that he goes on to make. And
Yeah.
Tom's making the point, well, it's controversial
Right.
as to whether or not it is or isn't.
Right.
So some theologians think so, some think not.
Right.
So for the sake of the argument that's dependent on that stipulation.
Right.
You at least need to acknowledge, well, if I'm right here,
Right.
then my argument might go, but if I'm wrong, then this subsequent argument is going to collapse.
Correct.
He doesn't do that in the text. He goes, well, this is
Correct.
a dubious thing, so therefore, then he builds an argument on that dubious.
Correct. So
And
you're
that's what he's taking issue. So, well, there's a lot of people think it isn't dubious.
you're reinforcing what I said at the very beginning. Remember I said he's going to take a position on on topics that perhaps people haven't settled or whatever. So this is one of the topics. A later one is going to be just about the science, and we'll get to some of those later. If you decide to take a hard position on something that's controversial, then you're building on speculation. And that's what the critics have been saying. It's not that, because there hasn't been kind of a collection of thought to everything. And so even to be fair in writing a book, how would I write a book? If there were like 2 or 3 viewpoints, I'd say if one's true, then that's what this means. If 2's true, not only what it is, but also what the implications are. And if 3's true, something like that. And I think as far as like an academic book, I think that would read better. Instead of just landing on one, and it's like, okay, that's it.
An interesting thing to me is that he's made he's made some of these assertions that are debatable, but stating them as fact or necessary postulates.
Right.
And that's exactly the thing that he's attacked at other people in all of his debates. So he's just dismantled other people's positions for doing exactly what he's doing.
Okay, structure of the Pentateuch. So this is from Howe. Craig wants to justify his belief that Genesis 1 to 11 should be treated as thematically distinct from the rest of the Pentateuch. Beginning on page 21, he briefly discusses the theme of the Pentateuch. It's curious that he takes this particular scholar, David Klein's notion of the theme, rather than any other Old Testament scholar. Now, Howe's viewpoint, it's curious that he would adopt his position since Klein has identified himself as a postmodernist. And then actually, this is a direct quote. I don't have quotation marks, but Klein's was talking about, so the postmodern is where I am now, whatever that means and whatever postmodern means, which is a good summary of what postmodernism is, right? So I don't even know why the word, it's just called P or something. I don't know. Okay, but Howe even goes further, and I think, sometimes you can have a sense of humor, right, as a scholar. You got to know when the things you read are funny, because they're not going to have little emojis there or a laugh track in the background. But I do think it's funny that Howe went on to quote from Moreland and Craig's book, an entire quotation about what is postmodernism, and he put that in his book. What is postmodernism? Why am I reading this? Because I think a lot of the concern I have with Craig's book has to do with worldview. That's it. It's really more about that. I mean, the whole topic here about Genesis 1 to 11 being structurally different. I can buy that, but what do you mean by that and where are you coming from? According to postmodernism, item of language such as literary text does not have the authorial meaning, at least one that is accessible to the interpreters. Thus, the author is in no privileged position to interpret his own work. In fact, the meaning of the text is created by and resides in the community of readers who share an interpretation of the text. Thus, there's no such thing as a book of Romans. Rather, there's a Lutheran Catholic Marxist book of Romans. So what it means is the meaning is in the subject. Whoever picks the book up is going to tell you what it means. So for the postmodernist, there's no objective truth. Rather, truth is culturally determined or determined by one's own perspective. And let's even add more words. It is the rise of humanism, specifically after the Renaissance, where people are looking around, they identify people as having some sort of free will, viewpoint. And I think for a lot of academic people, it comes down to a pragmatic thing. A lot of times voting is how the world works, or even asking the opinions of people about what decision you're going to do next. So in a very pragmatic way, they're saying, you know what? An academic, intellectual person, all that really matters is what the subjects think. I don't know if there's objective truth, but I see that there's 17 people in this community and we need to make a decision. So all that matters is what's inside this room and what is objectively true. Why does that even really matter? So that is kind of where a lot of people with a postmodernist viewpoint, but then you got to wonder, are even subjects objective? That's the next question. What's to say that your viewpoint couldn't change? Because people do change their mind about things over time. Okay, now I did copy one diagram from Howe's book, and this has to do with A&E myths. So there's these ancient Near East myths, and some of them have been discovered in when I say recent years, I don't know what recent means. It could be 200, but when you're thinking about the scale of Adam and Eve, to me, 200 years is recent, okay? Like when Adam and Eve could have lived thousands of years ago. So in this diagram, Craig's assumptions based on artifacts, the idea is he goes from the myth to the biblical narrative. In other words, he thinks whatever the myths were formed, remember that imagination about the cherubim and whatever you were seeing? Like, you know what? We're just going to we have these people and they see the world they have. And so they're going to draw on the stories and the fables and the songs from their viewpoint. They're going to use all these characters from their environment to construct Genesis 1 to 11. Okay, that's his viewpoint. Alternate assumption based on content is a biblical narrative affected it the other way. But even though this diagram is written whatever way that is, there's even a stronger idea. This goes to the fact that if you believe God is the author of the Bible, there's an active form here. And I know, again, I'm not dismissing this diagram from Howe because I think it's very important, but A&E myths come from wherever. And anyway, any other people there, God would have known about them. And I kept thinking about Craig being a Molinist. You're laughing because you know where I'm going with this. I know, it's so sad. He already knew about the A&E myths that would have existed and how people would have read them. And by the way, not only would God known that, as far as the subjective thing, we talk about all people reading the Bible, he would not only know what the people were thinking of who actually wrote down and preserved the Bible, every generation that preserved an authoritative copy of that, and the way we all read it today, and the way I'm going to read it tomorrow. And that's what a Molinist thinks.
And what's wrong with that? It's not true. What is that knowledge? What's the implication of?
The implication is that doesn't fit his viewpoint here. You don't get the link? So what?
I mean, God knew in Molinism that people would misunderstand the biblical narrative.
Yeah, okay. Well, let me say a few things about Molinism. That might be a debatable topic here. Some of you might not agree with Molinism. I happen to favor Molinism. I don't promote Molinism, but I can see why it would be a rational thing to arrive at that answer. That God would know all the free will choices that you would make in the future. If that's true, everything happens from a very sovereign viewpoint, as far as God's concerned. And no matter how things happen, whether the arrow's to the left or the right, God preserved a text that's authoritatively true, period. No matter where it came from. Somebody was born, and obviously there's people in the Bible. And so what? You say, well, they saw a person and therefore they wrote a person into the Bible. Like, I don't know what that means. He's like, God preserved the Bible the way he wanted us to understand it. I have a much simpler viewpoint. And I know right now there's active scholarship in this area to try to tease out this idea of genre. And this is an important theme in Craig's book, that the Genesis narrative is very similar to other types of myths that were written around that time. This is a major theme of his argument.
Is this chart here that Tom is talking about, is it talking about the content or the genre, or what is being referred to here in this?
I think it's the content.
I didn't think Craig talked, the content came from ancient Near Eastern myths, but only the genre was, that there was no causal connection, my understanding in watching all his videos. I thought, Richard, I don't guess you.
Well, I don't know, I don't know if there's a difference between what he did in the videos and what he settled on, and
That could be the case too, but
I'm not sure.
I'm not thinking Craig thinks that
I didn't think
the
he
myth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Using.
Hal's conclusion is that he was stating in his book that the biblical narrative was derivative of the A and the myths.
Right,
That's what he thinks. Craig is assuming.
right.
But we know from our own experience that when you write a narrative, you employ cultural artifacts. So we know that it's not improper to have the arrow, not improper in a moral sense, but that it happens that the arrow does go from the left to the right when people write a narrative, that they employ social
I
devices,
think
cultural
there's a
devices.
difference between, let's say, that a mythology somehow gave rise to a biblical narrative. That's one thing. It's another thing that the mythology might contain things that are just common human experiences.
Yes.
And so the biblical narrative arises out of the same common human experience. In other words, you might have an ancient Near Eastern myth where water is used as a symbol for spiritual cleansing. And then you find the scripture narrative where it uses water as a symbol of spiritual cleansing. But it would be a non sequitur to say the biblical narrative is borrowing this from the myth. You go, no, they're both borrowing it from the fact that water is just a thing that we use to cleanse, and it lends itself.
Right.
I think that's the.
But a better example might be water as the source or the location of chaos.
Well,
So-
I'm just saying that
But because
the
that's
similarities
obvious.
between the biblical narrative and the ancient Near Eastern myths is probably more reasonably explained by virtue of the fact they're both drawing from just normal human experience.
But it's not normal human experience to think of water as a source of chaos. So.
No, that's why I didn't say chaos. I said
But no,
cleansing.
but what I'm saying is, okay, there's that with water cleansing, but in the biblical narrative, there is discussion or allusions to this idea of chaos and water hovering over the surface
Yeah.
of the deep.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those are not in the ancient Near Eastern myths.
Yeah.
Okay, I
So
think some of them are.
There's probably
Yeah.
more in the biblical narrative that you don't see at all in the ancient
Right.
Near Eastern myths than the ones that you do see there.
So, and this is another area where, yeah, I can't bring up the source material. I actually do have it on the computer, but we can, it's substantial. I mean, this is not a trivial topic, none of these are, but would recommend people reading Craig's viewpoint and especially Howe. So, go and study this because again, the topic itself, I'll repeat my earlier comment is the studies and the interest in this topic is beyond just Craig and Howe. I mean, this is now part of the scholarship in this area. How do we reconcile that? And I've heard this on, for example, in the last month, I heard, had someone make that claim on Facebook, completely unrelated to this talk. It said, Mark, Epic of Gilgamesh inspired the entire early Bible or whatever, some sort of claim. So commonly, people will latch on to things that they read. And again, they may only read one viewpoint. So to me, it's relevant too for apologetics because it's the type of thing people might bring up. How do you understand it against the other authored books? But it's not just that. I mean, what about all the non-canonical books of the Bible? To me, it's a kind of a same type of challenge. What do you do with all the historical books that didn't get canonized? What do you do with the Apocrypha? So valid points that people may have and, areas of scholarship. Okay. This section I like so much. I just quoted almost the whole thing. This was right at the end. This has to do with critical approach. And although, I was looking at, this is in the last chapter of Howe's book. I was looking at his whole book. I don't know that he really went into detail on a lot of this. However, a lot of them shot one after another as bullet points. I said, yep. I like this. So let's read some of these. I know this is really small text. Go ahead.
You help me with what critical approach means?
Critical approach. Okay, good. So it does have to do with kind of a higher criticism approach of scripture and, or just generally scholarship, period. Not just Bible, but anything. So Craig almost completely ignores the fatal problems of critical approach. Craig's appeals to Old Testament scholars does not help this argument. Most Old Testament scholars are healthily influenced by critical philosophy, which undermines the methodology as an objective study of the text. Craig completely ignores the Old Testament scholars who have rejected the critical approach. Just because of a majority of Old Testament scholars have not entirely rejected the conclusions of critical analysis does not prove that the critical approach is reasonable or even reliable. So what he's saying is that just because you haven't gone for the whole thing, okay, so again, truth is not determined by a majority vote, and Old Testament scholars are susceptible to prejudice and unstated and unanalyzed assumptions as anyone else. Craig completely ignores the fact that the critical methodology entails the rejection of inerrancy, rejection of divine inspiration, the assumed historical and literary priority of extra-biblical pseudonymous. Is synonymous?
We could read it. Go on.
All right, works, and the assumed discredited evolutionary paradigm is an explanation of the religious development of Israel. He thinks, well, he's making the case it's discredited. Craig completely ignores the fatal problems of dating of Deuteronomy and how it undermines the whole dating methodology and critical approach. Now, again, this is a conclusion statement. It's a bit unsatisfying to see this as a presentation because you're not being able to drill into the details. I know. But what is aligned with both Howe and Rana is they make the same claim about Craig building on this evolutionary paradigm. They've said it several times, and having read Craig's approach, I think that is correct. And I'm going to have more to say about what I mean by that. Okay. Body of literature. Now we're going to get to Rana. And so Craig, so this is actually from Rana's PDF, which you can get on the Reasons to Believe website. This one you don't have to buy. You have to buy Craig's book or Howe's book. And Casey Luskin, his work is on the website. So also you don't have to buy that one. But you do have to buy John Oswald. Yeah, that's already 5 books. All right, so body of literature, Craig, in many respects, he does an admirable job handling the insights that come from the published work in physical anthropology and archaeology. And to be fair, conclusions he draws about the shared cognitive capacity of H. heidelbergensis, Neanderthals, and modern humans are held by many paleoanthropologists. Paleoanthropologists, that's a big one. Nevertheless, Craig sidesteps a significant number of studies that count against his model. Okay, ignoring the views of paleoanthropologists who regard anatomically and behaviorally modern humans as fundamentally different from the other hominins. That is to say, Craig disregards the perspectives of a growing number of primatologists, evolutionary anthropologists, and evolutionary psychologists who regard human beings as exceptional. I don't know if I have a whiteboard pen. Do I have? No. Okay, you're just gonna have to take this from memory. Yes? Is there one? All right, I don't want to stray far from the microphone, but I want to talk about four causes. Aristotle's four causes. How many of you heard of Aristotle's four causes? Material, right? Formal, efficient, final. The Bible has a viewpoint on all four. And again, I don't know that Rana didn't talk about this. I don't know if it's in Howe's book either. Four causes. When I think about humans being caused, I'm thinking about four things in biblical worldview, just what I just said. And this is why this is the charge about Craig going to the evolutionary framework. Evolution does not have a final cause for humans. They don't know what people were made for. Evolution.
Naturalistic evolution.
Correct.
Well, is he proposing theistic evolution? Because that does have a final cause.
Perhaps. But it's challenged by all the problems with evolution, such as where did the information come from? Just, the same arguments that Stephen Meyer makes from Discovery Institute. And later on, we're going to see a claim about Adam from Craig. So going over this fourth thing. So material is, what is it made of? Efficient, who done it? Formal has to do with the form of something, like what is the plan here? Like the schematic diagram of something. And final cause has to do with what is this for? My viewpoint is that although the Bible might be silent on material, or not completely clear, about the history of genetics, it does have a message about final. So as a Christian, I'm going to start with what the Bible does have. So when we go back to that early quote I had about, how do you understand Bible and science? I want to take the element, if we're studying human beings and we're studying the cause of how they were made, I'm going to start with those four. And even though the Bible hasn't got complete answers, maybe in revealed scripture for all of them, I'm going to use that as a framework. And so automatically that's going to knock some things out. Even though the Bible didn't make a claim about science, then you say, well, science is making this claim. Well, couldn't have happened that way because that's not what, that doesn't jive with the Christian worldview. That's my viewpoint. I don't know if I want to make this point now or later. Let's go for it right now. I heard this in the doctoral defense. Our Kristen Davis is talking about the minimal facts argument that has been popularized. How many by Gary Habermas? How many of you heard that? Evidence of the resurrection, minimal facts. All right, let's think about that for a second. I, again, respect that analysis. And of course, I am no expert on the resurrection like Dr. Habermas. However, it is when he says minimal facts, it means that he's using not all the evidence. And now I have been involved or, peripherally involved with discussions with people on the internet about what is the difference between minimal and maximal facts arguments. You have heard these arguments, they're going back and forth. Now here's the challenge. When Gary Habermas does this to build a case in the resurrection, that particular set of minimal facts is anchored in particular literature for particular scholars. So it's already known, people can go look it up. But think about it for a second. He's getting this from a community. So it's not like there's some, magic objective definition of minimal facts. In fact, the definition of minimal is subjective. You see what I'm saying? And yes, you can use that if everyone agrees that this minimum is what we're starting from. But as a general philosophy, to start with a set of things and then to build from there, is kind of a minimal facts approach. Now, when I go to Craig and I think about how he's reading science, to me, I think that's again a gap. And that's why that is the part that where the way he writes it sounds like he's coming from an evolutionary framework. But I would make an argument that not everything, this is my argument, not everything from evolution, but some things from evolution were added as, for example, that information can arise out of chaos. All right, that's a philosophical assumption that's built into an evolutionary conclusion. And Stephen Meyer talks about this in his book on theistic evolution, which I have been pointing people to. That's one of the gaps. And that is also kind of the heart of what Darwin added, is that, you know, something else can come from something primitive, something, you know, of higher information value. Okay. Genesis is mytho-history. So this is comparing Oswald. So Craig spends nearly 200 pages, maybe about 50% of the book, investigating the literary genre of Genesis, and ultimately concludes that Genesis 1 to 11 includes many of these myth-like elements, and these chapters represent mytho-history. What are some examples? Some of the ones I just told earlier, the snake and the cherubim. All right, so there are other things that he points to. John Oswald says, now this is from a recent interview. Mytho-history is an oxymoron. Myths are ahistorical by nature. And again, this is a conclusion. I know I'm not defending it, but he's got an entire book on that. And of course, Eric described that book in last month. How many of you heard last month? Because I didn't hear Eric talk, but that's where he lands. And
It's symmetrical with what C.S. Lewis would say. Just, he would say, I know a lot about myth, and the Bible is not a myth.
right.
Well, doesn't he say it's the true myth? He was an expert in mythology, but I believe he or Tolkien said that Christianity was the truth.
Okay, we do get into the whole, there is a scholarship around myth that I respect, having read now what Craig said and also what critics are saying, especially in Howe, but also Oswald. And I couldn't tell, I'm not ready to tease out the differences with examples. But I do believe that these conclusions are correct. And even especially this line here, that mytho-history is an oxymoron, like why would you even put those together? But I did look up where Craig was citing an earlier author, and instead of mytho-history, the other theologian was using the phrase proto-history. This was one of those counterpoint books, and I don't know if it's one of the Zondervan books, and again, I don't have the citation for you. It's cited in Craig's book, okay, so it's not, that's where it came from. You may have seen some of these counterpoint books that have come out, and in fact, when I read the counterpoint book, I said, well, I don't like any of the three ideas in that particular counterpoint book. And I think as time goes on, I'm beginning to have even a viewpoint about Christian publishers, which I had, and I'll tell you why, because I was at a conference last week and we were talking about the Enneagram, and this is again off topic, but the Enneagram is this idea that came from New Age. And now almost every major biblical publisher has now published a book on Enneagram. All of them, Baker Books, I mean, Thomas Nelson, everybody. Like there's been an explosion just in the last 3 years because people want to know more about their life. And you know what? Mythology, the astrology charts, and you all may remember being in the 70s and 80s, you go on a talk show and people would ask, what's your sign or whatever. Yeah, and like, why are they all going down here? And again, you know what it is, humanism. It's all about me. I want to know more about me. And again, I'm having a viewpoint about Enneagram and why are all the major publishers going after that? But it's now, I have a more formed viewpoint. So you can't just look at the publisher, you still have to look at who wrote it. It doesn't really matter what publisher they publish with. Who is making the claim and why are they making it, right? So to me, that's good enough. I wouldn't look at a publisher as endorsing material, because I was thinking about this too when I was driving over here today. They're completely market-minded. They are not about content, the objective content. They're about the subjective market. The Christian market, what will they buy? And that's what their whole marketing strategy is. So again, it's where people, you know, earlier when I was talking about this pragmatic thing, it's like, oh yeah, but whatever the objective thing is, who's going to buy my book? Where are we going to get the sales? So anyway, that's what happens. You know what? And I think this is a cautionary tale to anyone who might be listening, who's going to be producing scholarship. We have to, you are individually responsible. Your publisher is not going to push back and say, don't publish this or whatever. And you're going to get people to sign off on things and put it in a journal or whatever. And I think it's all individual responsibility. Okay, Luskin. So Casey Luskin works for Discovery Institute. He's been a scholar there. I think that's his title, for maybe 20 years. So his statement here, Craig has various inconsistencies and fantastical elements that, if taken literally, are so extraordinary as to be palpably false. And again, this is a page citation from Craig's book. This is certainly a major part of his conclusion that the parts of Genesis are myth. Because God can perform miracles, Craig is careful to justify excluding miracles from those elements that he considers mythological, fantastical, or false. Luskin's viewpoint is he doesn't seem to apply this rule consistently, and many have made Craig's judgments here seem subjective. And you may know Craig's connection to Mike Licona and the entire debate about whether or not certain events happen right before the or right at when, you know, Jesus was being crucified. And there's an entire debate that launched this whole discussion on biblical inerrancy. And I sat in that room over there and I heard Mike Licona gave his defense of biblical inerrancy. And when I heard it, I said, not convincing, but at least I gave him a hearing. All right. And for those of you interested in the topic, you need to give the man a hearing. He's a well-respected scholar. I think the Chicago Statement on Inerrancy is a much better and well-studied document. And when you study it, you begin to see, you know, what that statement's about. And a lot of the critics of Chicago Statement, and by the way, RTB supports the Chicago Statement on inerrancy. One of the ideas in there is, how do you tell the difference between something that's a parable or, you know, different parts of the Bible? And they keep you know, the straw man argument is all you people are reading the Bible literally, as if everything, and that's straw man. I continue here. I'm not saying it's coming from Licona, but I have heard it from other critics that, you know, it's all taken literal. You can't see anything that's poetic or, you know, in other genres. And that's a misstatement of the Chicago Statement on Inerrancy. And I know we had I remember sitting next to you at some meal where we were talking about Chicago Statement, and you almost gave me that direct quote. Whatever Mike Licona is doing, it's not the Chicago Statement.
Oh, he'll pretty much admit that.
Right.
His article, he wrote in Troubled Waters
Mhm.
of Chicago Statement. He and I had a debate about that at our conference some years ago that one can watch. So he parses out his views and parse out mine, try to find where we agree or where we differ.
Now, here's the value, because I'm going to come to the value statement for Christians. For us to claim Christianity, we are basically claiming, in far as the Old and the New Testament, that we're dealing with a historical account. Yes, there are parables that we have to explain because they came right out of Jesus' mouth, right? Okay, so we have to understand, when is it a parable and when is he telling you a story of something that happened? But even more than that, the number one miracle that explains evidence of the resurrection. But, you know, and maybe right behind that is the creation of the universe, Genesis 1:1. Where'd that come from? We're making some claims. Other people will make other types of claims. So wherever we are on this topic, I think at some level, this is a topic worthy of what I'm sure everyone here has invested some time in, right? Studying the difference between what are the Bible's claims about things that we claim to be miracles. And this is why that's important. Progression of Adam and Eve. Okay, this is Luskin's claim. In First Things, Craig then proposes that Adam and Eve were not cognitively advanced as modern humans, and postulates that humanity experienced standard evolutionary changes after Adam and Eve. Okay, you following this? After Adam and Eve, including some that would emerge, this is a quote, emerge slowly through environmental niche construction and gene cultural co-evolution to evolve the more advanced brains that we have today. What this suggests is not only does Craig seem to propose or allow that many, if not all, of humanity's intellectual abilities evolved via natural mechanisms, but he effectively believes we evolved upward after Adam and Eve. Now, here's what Luskin says. Craig's model contrasts sharply with the traditional Christian view that humanity has fallen since Adam and Eve's initial state. Now, how does Craig get here? Part of this is, and it's actually, it's always hard to know what order to put the slides in, but because he puts now Adam and Eve as part of this group called Homo heidelbergensis, whatever, that's a much more primitive species with a smaller brain, and therefore he's committed to having a mechanism for them to come from smaller brain to the big brain we have today. All right, so if you draw that science conclusion, that's how you get there, and that's different. That's all I have to say. But we're going to see some other things that are wrong about heidelbergensis as we're getting in.
But if you take that theory, then that would mean that all of mankind was doomed to a fallen nature because of a choice made by an intellectually inferior being.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Why does my original, and you're probably making an argument against that original sin again. Why is my original sin the same as that one? Or maybe do I need a more advanced original sin? Did the original sin advance?
So there's no problem for him.
There's not a problem.
Okay.
That's not a problem.
All right.
I would think as long as the heidelbergensis had a sufficient cognitive ability to imbue him with moral culpability, that's all that's sufficient.
That's
And I
his
think Craig
thesis.
would say that he did.
That is his thesis, yes.
I cannot. Saying is, his argument, I assume, would be that heidelbergensis was smart enough to be morally culpable.
Correct.
And that's the important part of how he can bring death, spiritual death even, into the world, and that affects us.
Correct.
And as you go through this, I just keep coming, the thought keeps coming to me that is Craig trying to join the group that wants to demythologize the Bible? He wants to he still wants to say these are myths. They didn't really happen. We need to take them out of the Bible. We need to rewrite the book.
Even as you're saying that, remember the point I added at the very beginning, Genesis 1-11 is part of the Bible. I think Genesis 1-11 is part of the Bible, part of the historical record of the Bible.
So
Not some sort of imagined,
but there's been people over the years who've gone to great extent to try and show why certain things in the Bible were myths.
Yeah.
And we need to take them out so that rational, intelligent people can become Christians.
Oh,
Because they're
okay,
not gonna believe things like the resurrection or.
Correct. So, okay, now, this part I do want to speak to, because you have all these churches now want to be relevant, woke, whatever. They want to go to a smaller base of information and say, I can start with a smaller base of information, whatever that is, and take people to salvation. But why, here's my counter argument. Why would I want to start with a cultural context when I think the Bible is the way to take people to salvation? God's revealed word and complete word for what we need,
Well,
right?
It goes back to your argument about worldview.
It's worldview.
Some people want to look at the Bible through the lens of the world, but we should all be looking at the world through the lens of the Bible.
Right,
So your worldview can lead you to two different places.
cool.
Don't think Dr. Craig is trying to be the college out of the Bible. He has a view of Genesis 1-11, and he does not propose you get the Bible as this genre. I disagree myself with his genre analysis at this point.
Right.
But the issue is Genesis 1-11 of this mytho-historical genre as he defines it. It's myth
As he
does not mean
defines it.
false.
Right.
It's folklore's view of myth. It doesn't mean false. It doesn't mean there's a lot of figures.
But he does use the expression palpably false. That was a quote.
Well, as he might try to analyze though, what is metaphorical versus what is literal in the Bible, he might say it wouldn't be literally true that
From
God would
It's
walk.
a direct quote, but he said it was palpably false.
I'm going by what Dr. Craig said, mytho-historical means. So myth does not mean false.
So
Yeah.
what does historical mean?
It means it has, there's a historical part of Genesis which is rooted in the genealogies that there was a literal Adam.
What's the difference between myth and history so that you would have the combined?
It's a confusion of the two. This genre is telling a story of history in the folklore view of mythological.
What does folklore mean?
I'm reminded of the scripture that says, let's not argue about definition of words.
About souls.
What does it mean if it doesn't mean false?
It means, part of it means it's grounding current realities in the primordial past. That's part of the characteristic of this genre. And it has to do with using a lot of metaphorical language.
Part of the concern about even the term mythohistory, which is repeated many times in Craig's book, is its subjective nature as a term, which is part of this whole scholarship discussion.
He actually defines it pretty well.
He defines it well, but it's his definition, which makes it subjective.
But when it comes down to saying which parts of Genesis is literal or figurative, then it's all over the board.
Correct. Yes,
I ask a really kind of overarching question.
Yeah.
And I kind of like both of you, since you read the book. What's his point in writing this book? Why did he write this book? Why did he feel it was necessary for him to write this book?
that may be in the introduction, and unfortunately, I don't have it on this computer to bring up that answer.
I mean, it was a question that when he started this process,
Yeah.
it was a question he wanted to settle for himself,
Okay,
basically. I think he didn't know, the initial question that inaugurated his research, however many years, was, if you say you believe the Bible, are you required then to believe that Adam was a historical figure? Because he wasn't, maybe it's possible that a person could be faithful to the scriptures and take Adam as something less than historical.
Yeah.
And that's what was this whole thing. His conclusion was, yes, if you believe the Bible, you have to believe that Adam was a historical figure. So if you don't think Adam was historical, then you just have to say, I don't believe the Bible, because it certainly does say that he's historical. That was his overall conclusion in the midst of all the other
Yeah.
things that he does with the mystical history.
Yeah.
But that's how I understood it when I heard him talking about it
okay,
while he was in the process of the research that he was.
okay, yeah, and I don't know about his motivations. What I do know from the publishing record, of course, we got Rana's book that came out in 2 editions. And then we have Swamidas had a book 2019, where he talks about genealogical Adam, or yeah, that's correct. I may or may not talk about that. And then we have that Counterpoints book. I think that was 2015. So again, number of people are talking about this. So yes, but now to answer your question, why is he interested? I don't know. He's particularly kicked off, but you could go ask him. You could go ask him. Good thing, cool thing is here. We just go down. We'll just show up at his house. We could literally do that. I mean, Eric, you'd have to take a little while, but go ahead. I know, it's whatever. Go ahead. Here we are.
But I will
Yeah.
say in this idea that Craig seems to be trying to interpret the Bible through evolutionary lenses or whatnot. His approach was sound, I think, in segmenting off his hermeneutics and his exegesis of the text, then saying what models look to be plausible, then later saying, now let's look at natural revelation and let's look at what the science says, and then see what we have. Because he basically went through several different views and said, basically, I think this mytho-historical view and young earth view of more literal interpretation are the 2 most plausible views of interpretation. He rejected the Gnostic view. He rejected a lot of different views. He walked through all of them and said these don't work for various reasons he thought. Then he said, however, the young earth view won't fit with science. Mytho-history could fit with science. That's how he's kind of landed on saying this is a plausible.
See, but even the way you said it is exactly what the critics have been saying. This fits with science. I go back to the four causes. So I know. I think what you're saying is accurate.
At the end of the day, but here's the thing, a theistic view where God had a purpose.
I know, but this is an active discussion. We'll have some more quotes here from Biologos. Let's see, I don't know what slide we're on. You know, I'm gonna go forward really fast to remind myself because I haven't seen the numbers. 1, 2, 3. All right, we got a lot of stuff in here, so we gotta move a little bit. We gotta move a little bit faster here. All right, so let's just cruise on. Okay, the mutations challenge. This is Luskin. So 2008 population genetics study and genetics found to obtain only 2 specific mutations via Darwinian evolution for humans with a much smaller effective population size. This type of change would take more than 100 million years. So we're now, actually, we're segueing now into the science. Okay, we did more of the theology, and I'm sorry we can't spend more time there because I love theology, but I did want to put it first. Okay, now we're going to segue into some of the science claims. You're going to see these in Luskin, and you're going to see them in Rana. Okay, those are you're going to be your sources to study the difference. Now, Craig never directly disputes mainstream evolutionary theory. His readers miss out on an opportunity to hear about this powerful challenge to neo-Darwinianism. So here's the thing with science, and this is different from scripture. Once you decide that 66 books of the Bible are authoritative, and again, I'm dismissing certain verses that may have been added by scholars, but let's just say the 66 books of the canon, that's your playing field, and then you have different manuscripts to go from. Science is different, and in a way we know it's true. And I know Rana has to feel it because in his second edition of his book, he made a lot of positional changes. I talked about that 7 years ago when I did the presentation on this book. And that is part of the challenge of science. So to come down hard on a conclusion based on science it could put you into an awkward position. I'm not saying it would, but it depends why you're making a definite conclusion on a scientific fact. That's the best way I can describe that. So part of as we're getting into the science now, both Luskin and Rana say that there have been a lot of new studies in this field. And almost every time a new study comes out, you have, and I'm talking about peer-reviewed, because you have to understand what peer-reviewed means. Peer-reviewed does not mean that's the last word on that topic. Peer-reviewed means they took some data and they made a conclusion based on that data. They may have that same data, another group of scientists might grab it with some other data and publish a new article. And then depending on the reception by the scientific community, people may gravitate toward a new understanding of all the data as more data becomes available. So I think both Luskin and Rana generally think that not enough science was completely included. And this is different than having someone from a theological viewpoint. You know, what Craig typically does in his systematic theology, they're fairly well-defined schools of thought that we've heard of. Calvinism, Arminianism, certain traditions that are out there, people coming from certain viewpoints and how you understand the Bible. And in science, like a lot of them, they don't know what they're going to think 5 years from now, because they're working on something right now and it's on their computer and they're not sure about what is going to, be settled. But the difference is they're not trying to make necessarily grand statements just because they may publish an article. So here's the point. The point from Luskin and Rana, and I think that's important for this group, because RTB and what is the mission of Reasons to Believe? What I really respect from the scholars is they try to distill latest science and try to show its ongoing relevance. It's not just the fact that things add to something, but new science actually may change paradigms. And we've seen those paradigms change, during my lifetime. You all seen it because now we know, like, the mass of the universe is not still only like 5% of what we call ordinary matter. Like, everything now is dark matter and dark energy, and it's still an unanswered question. Doesn't shake my faith as a Christian. Zero. In fact, because of the fine tuning evidence, I think that's even more compelling. So it's challenging to, have this type of information, try to keep up with it. And like I said, I don't think anyone is a specific expert, and just keeping an open mind, especially on the science that, new things are coming out. Brain size. This is a big point in Craig. Craig is all about volume. How big is it? Bigger means better. Some mammals have, in fact, I didn't go into this. Some mammals have huge brains, a lot bigger than a human brain. Rana's argument, location matters. And that's based on, they take these sensors now, they can tell what parts of the brain activate when people have certain experiences. I think Rana said this in his interview, the one he recorded for Christian Research Institute. So when people have religious experience, there's certain areas in the front of your brain that get activated. And it shows that some sort of advanced thinking is happening here. So it's not just about the size. And of course, we're going to have some fun with this because I'm going to quote Luskin. What is important in determining what is human? And Rana's argument is about symbolic processing. So I'm just going to read the last one here. Many anthropologists believe these anatomical features help explain the advanced cognitive abilities of modern humans. For example, the parietal lobe of the brain is responsible for imagery, perception of stimuli, working in long-term memory, sensoromotor transformation, which plays a role in planning, and visual spatial integration, which provides hand-eye coordination needed for making art. So Rana's argument has to do with what makes, this is the crux of a lot of the questions. What makes the human species different from other mammals, right? That's a fundamental question. How do we know the difference? Okay, this is Luskin's view. So she's saying that others have shown intelligence is determined largely by internal brain organization and is far more complex than the sole variable of brain size. As one paper notes, brain size may be secondary to the selective advantages of the allometric reorganization within the brain. And we're coming up to funny here. So anthropologist Stephen Molnar likewise observes the size of the brain is one of the factors related to human intelligence. And of course, that's it. But look at this one. As a demonstration, Koch offers the examples of the Russian novelist Ivan Turgenev, who had a brain weight of 21 grams, compared with the French novelist Anatole France, who had a brain weight of 17 grams. So one brain was literally twice the mass of the other one, yet both were acclaimed novelists. And of course, these are modern people. And the brain size is twice the size. Go ahead.
An article of a French guy who lost most of his brain, not half, but most of his brain. And he leads a normal life, and they say he's only slightly less intelligent than an average person. But it still seemed like
You're
this
saying
was-
there's hope for me, thank you.
Well, Turgenev had to write in Russian, so that took like half his brain right there.
We were saying earlier that the small brain size of Convergensis meant that they were morons, we know what said, but subhumanly intelligent. But now we're saying it's not the size of the brain case that we can determine how
Good
intelligent they
observation.
That's the first time.
That's why I was surprised.
I know.
And of course, we know why people studying bones would make this argument, because that's what they have. They have a skull. And therefore they can say, oh, here's the brain. And this is one of the major ways that the scientists have determined what the difference is with these. I still like to call them pre-hominid, because that's my viewpoint. Pre-hominid species. Go ahead.
As a retired pathologist, I don't know what you guys did, but I bet I held more brains in my hands that you've ever held. And I've never come close to seeing a brain that was 2,000 grams.
Okay, all right.
The average brain is about 1,200 grams.
1,200, okay.
And when I say average, I mean, like, that's like just about everybody, like nobody, I've never come close to, that I've never had a brain in my experience
Okay,
that was anywhere close to that weight. That's amazing. I don't know what size head that.
all right, so there's some perspective. All right, so image of God details. So Craig's list is abstract thinking, planning depth, economic and technological innovativeness, and symbolic behavior. And I'm going to tell you Rana's, and without reading the quote. He's going to make the point that the first three are shown in primates, like chimpanzees. So he doesn't see them as distinguishing features. Rana already wrote in his book that made the case for symbolic behavior as being the distinction. Okay, so you have both his analysis and also his earlier book, Who is Adam? Why does he think that symbolic behavior is important? I think it's important. Why? Because we need to relate to God. Image of God. Okay, so symbolism, I'll just go in here, which manifests as language, art, music, and body ornamentation, has the added advantage of being directly detected in the archaeological record. That isn't the case with the first two criteria on Craig's list, abstract thinking and planning depth. That's not in the archaeological record. Can't tell. So those have to be inferred. And drawing inferences for these capacities often requires speculation and is highly susceptible to the investigator's imagination and bias. But that's, kind of where science is. Moving on. So these are the lists that Rana's proposing, which is a different list. Symbolism, open-ended generative capacity, theory of mind, and social capacity. And again, I was thinking of making slides to explain these, but again, I'm just gonna have to defer you. Sorry, it's too much information. You got a flood of information, but I am saying that they are agreeing on symbolism as one of the criteria of what does it mean to be image of God, and then they are diverging on some of these other ideas. Inclusion of Neanderthals. So because Neanderthals displayed a capability for symbolism, that's why he thinks they are part of this group. Oh, also there's evidence of DNA. Rana, his arguments, Craig largely ignores the numerous published studies that challenge Neanderthal symbolism. And in fact, for every published claim of Neanderthal symbolism, several follow-up studies undermine that claim. So this again has to do with peer-reviewed research and how you get to certain conclusions. You need to draw the circle around the entire body of literature and say, all right, the vast scholarship is sending a message, not just one study. One peer-reviewed study is not going to necessarily or typically be the final word on anything, unless maybe you're Albert Einstein and you wrote your general relativity paper and changed the world and won the Nobel Prize. Okay, but very few people achieve that with one paper. Humans are uniquely symbolic. And there's a quote here. I'm not going to dwell on that. Reliance on the archaeological record. So Craig has, this is Rana's viewpoint, noble reliance on the archaeological record to assess personhood. And what I just said was that not everything about what being a person is necessarily going to show in the archaeological record. And the challenge is that when they discover bones, like fossils, it's assumed, and Rana thinks this is reasonable, that things that are found in the same layer were probably made by that creature. But there's other times when the remains are discovered without the benefit of those associated fossil remains. So sometimes they just find bones. And other times they find bones with things. And so they make a correlation that they know what that species was based on what they find. It's got weaknesses. All right, so here's now the theological implication. We have modern humans, you have Neanderthals, and they have a common ancestor, which is Heidelbergensis. And Craig comes to the point where this entire group is what Jesus Christ died for. The entire group. Heidelbergensis, Neanderthals, and what we call modern human, Homo sapiens. Rana's viewpoint, Craig's perspective is hard to justify based on anatomical considerations. He primarily uses brain size and blood flow to rationalize grouping Neanderthals and Heidelbergensis with Homo sapiens. Neither of these anatomical features indicate that Heidelbergensis had cognitive capacities on par with either Neanderthals or Homo sapiens. This has to do with just two things, right? So brain size of Heidelbergensis, so this one we're not getting to brain size, it's 1,250 milliliters. Homo erectus around 950 milliliters. And it's range high, I think that's liters. So it's high as 1250 for late appearing specimens. So this is significantly smaller than the brain size of Neanderthals at 1410 or Homo sapiens 1350. So the smaller size raises questions of whether this hominin had cognitive capacities comparable to Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. However, the reason he got there, and I'm just going to skip to the conclusion, because once you accept Neanderthals and once you accept Homo sapiens, this is the evolutionary framework argument, then you must accept Heidelbergensis. And that's how he got there. And that's what both Luskin and Rana said on the science.
I thought he got there because he needed 700,000 years, a time period for certain things to take place, and that's how he got to Heidelbergensis, not because he landed on
The genetic,
Neanderthals and humans.
the genetic thing, that could be
Yeah,
part of it,
genetic
because remember I said that earlier about the 100 million years. That
Yeah.
was Luskin's quote.
Like the Swamidass, I think, agrees with his timing on the genetic bottleneck, and going back 700,000 years fixes it.
Yep. It's an ongoing conversation. Okay, wait. So shortly after this book was published, a team of paleoanthropologists from the University of Winnipeg published a perspectives piece in which they argued Heidelbergensis never existed and should be abandoned altogether. This is Rana's conclusion, but not just Rana said this, Luskin said the same thing. So they argued in this new paper that had long been a catch-all category, placeholder to sign fossils. This is the number 750 to 125,000 years ago that didn't fit anywhere else. And in fact, they point out that the fossil remains assigned to Heidelbergensis often have incompatible features. In other words, they're not uniform. So this is a new study. Luskin said the same thing. That was Rana. This is Luskin. Mainstream science does not have a consensus view on whether Craig's candidate species, Homo heidelbergensis, is a valid taxonomic group. It's been heavily criticized in a recent article called "The Species Poorly Defined, Variably Understood, and Acting with Taxon Should Be Abandoned Altogether, as it has been poorly defined and used inconsistently." So again, this is a scientific challenge happens when you write a book. Okay, there's more on that. I'm not going to read that one because I think we made the point. So Ron is saying that what this means for evolutionary theory is that it could no longer be viewed, given that these studies are true, as the ancestral species that gave rise to both the modern human lineage and the Neanderthal and Denisovan lineage. A late appearing model member of Homo erectus is a possible contender for replacement. Craig includes Neanderthals as members of the human family. So this is the path. Craig includes Neanderthals as members of the human family, which forces him to place Adam and Eve in a group that gave rise to these two distinct evolutionary lines, but now that a group appears to be unknown. That's the evolutionary framework claim from Rana. Okay, and then we think about junk DNA. I don't think I'm going to dwell on that one. Craig continues to rely on biologos arguments that pseudogenes are broken and non-functional junk DNA that we share with apes, thereby demonstrating our common ancestry. This is Luskin now. Those arguments are increasingly contradicted by evidence presented in highly authoritative scientific papers, which find that pseudogenes are commonly functional and they ought not be assumed to be genetic junk. This is a continuing science discussion. And I think, again, okay, so this is almost the formal. The formal cause is DNA. I say DNA could be considered a formal cause because it is like a pattern. And, just because you don't understand what it does, let's see, absence of evidence doesn't mean evidence of absence or something like that. So it just means that just because we don't understand it, doesn't mean there's nothing to understand. Just like dark matter and dark energy. That's why I don't want to make a whole conclusion on something that's not understood. See, this is a danger in science to make, you can say, according to current information, this is not well understood. I respect that fact. But then to take that and now building block to now build a house on that, okay, well, that's science fiction, frankly, because you don't know. All right, application. This is my last slide. And I took it from Howe. At the end of the final chapter, Craig states that his quest has not led to a conclusion about the historical atom. So this is his quote from the book. Given the incompleteness of the data and the provisionality of science, the quest of the historical atom will doubtless never be concluded in our lifetime, or in anyone's lifetime for that matter. That's a direct quote from Craig. It is particularly problematic that Craig actually believes that because his quest is inconclusive, and that the question of the historical atom is necessarily inconclusive in itself and must be taken as inconclusive for everyone. Craig has declared ex cathedra what must be true about the quest for historical atom, and he expects all to grant nihil obstat. It's probably Latin that I don't understand what this means. I didn't look it up. I'll ask ChatGPT to his pronouncements. However, Craig might not have intended that his arguments and conclusions should be taken literally. Why should you take it literally? Because if taken literally, they're probably false. All right, so anyway, that's how he's ending. There are, I go back to the original. These are my takeaways. One has to do with worldview. Worldview questions do not go away. We're all here because of science in some manner or fact, and I continue, work in an area where science is important. I think that's super important. I am always curious in, what scientists are producing, what are they discovering, what do I think about it? Worldview is important, that's important. I don't want to forget about the doctrine of original sin. So again, you might want to go and read up on that. We should know, in fact, I didn't have as much time to go into the scholarship on that because I wanted to make sure I covered the spectrum. But I would like to, I'm personally more interested in seeing what the different viewpoints are on that topic. And then, what I said about the four causes, again, I'm layering down that. That was not in these analyses, but I think when I take the Christian worldview and I break it down to what are the causes of humanity, material, efficient, formal, final. Okay, I think that's a good taxonomic breakdown. And yes, it's not in the Bible. Okay, that taxonomic breakdown. However, I think it's a helpful tool to understand what do you mean cause. And I have to deal with this too, practical way, people doing studies now, what is the cause and what's the effect? Does anyone else have any final comments?
Could you repeat all that?
Is it Owl might do it. Go ahead.
I'm just reminded of my reaction the first time I heard that Dr. Craig had written this book. So, okay, he knows everything about philosophy. He knows just about everything about theology, but this is not his area of expertise. So why is he blundered in here and embarrassed himself?
And you know, I go back to my early statements. I really respect Dr. Craig as a scholar. I think he's made a difference for the kingdom. And I still remember, you know, I've gone to defenders class so many times in this same building and have had some lively and respectful conversations. Like people would ask questions or challenge his points. Sometimes he'd stay on it. Sometimes he might change his mind. So when I factor in the person that I know, that I consider him to still be an open-minded person, that in some sense, I'm not super worried about that, but knowing, you know, his stature in, you know, evangelical circles, some people are going to take this book, you know, a certain way, and they're not going to realize the scientific edges to it. I think even true, and we can get into this too with any of the cosmological evidence. And, you know, Hugh Ross has continued to update his science on cosmology. Rana's done it too with the book Who Was Adam, right? So they're continuing to move forward on, but they've done that, you know, their entire career. And because people are interested in science, because we are the bearers of that message, we're probably the super fans of science, right? I think one thing we can carry forward just as a general message is, you know, even if it comes from a scientist, you know, we got to have kind of a humble approach. It still comes to me back to that. Be a little bit humble about what you think you know about certain things. And I think even if you get into some of the conclusions, I don't think I captured the quote. There's even an idea that maybe Neanderthals and Homo sapiens are really one species. There's that idea. It's not fully fleshed out. Okay, so I'm willing to keep an open mind about what I have as a conclusion. And
I think
But-
that if you look at genetic material from people today,
Mhm.
you can find Neanderthal
Mhm.
gene. And I think that I read someplace where somebody asked Hugh Ross about that, or one of the scholars, and they attributed it to interspecies mixing of the
Mhm.
gene. They were still saying they were two separate organisms, two separate species.
Yep. And that is discussed both in Rana's work and in Craig's work. I think Luskin too, maybe, but definitely in Craig's work. And Rana.
What, is there a particular book by Luskin that you were coming from? I forgot what.
Yes,
the title.
so that was an analysis of this book. It is on their website, and again, I don't have the link, and I may be able to pop out of this screen and show it. If I can go to Chrome. Oh, I am in Chrome, so. How to make
That's all
this.
right, I can find out afterwards.
Yeah, it's on the website, Luskin's work.
Okay.
Your reference to Luskin, is that Casey Luskin?
Yeah.
Casey Luskin.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is online. Or we just come right up.
That's good. Chat GPT.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I can see people talking about it, so probably one of these links will go back
Yeah,
to where the
that's fine.
source is,
That's
but it is an online article.
Okay. Well, I think I remember now.
Thomas Howe's book, Amazon,
Yeah,
or
it's on-
major booksellers. And then Craig's book, of course, major booksellers, and the same thing with Rana's book, major booksellers. And Oswald, I'm not sure if that's necessarily in print. I got mine in Logos, but go ahead.
There was also this past November in Denver, there was a panel discussion on Craig's book on Evangelical Theological Society.
Wow.
Maybe for purchase.
Okay,
I think it might be for purchase. You go to, if you just Google Evangelical Theological Society,
wow,
chase the links and purchase that. And I think he was part of the panel, you know, which they were like there to critique his work, and he was there to interact with the panel. I didn't go to it. I was at ETS, but I didn't make it to the panel.
okay, that's great.
I just wanted to make one comment on the worldview idea. That I don't think it's, you know, from the start that you have to pick your biblical worldview or your scientific worldview.
Yep.
There has to be some kind of objective worldview or understanding of reality in order for you to accept that the Bible is the word of God. That's kind of a conclusion you come to.
Mhm.
And then from there, you can give it whatever credence it has. But it's not like you just arbitrarily pick up this worldview or that worldview and you go off to the races.
Mhm.
There's an objectivity or maybe even a neutralness that you have to assess the evidence. And some of it is physical scientific evidence
Mhm.
to believe that the Bible is the word of God. And then you go from there. So I
Well
just want to throw that out there.
Mhm.
I got that from your order.
Oh, did you?
I was excited. That sounds familiar.
And I
I
think
agree with me, I guess.
I was gonna say I got this from Dr. Howe, but I didn't know if I was gonna get it right. So-
But you
Okay,
don't-
all right.
you don't get the right to say whether what you wrote was correct or
No,
not.
I like
It
what
has to
Michael
be a
Lewis said once
consensus.
when he was asking during the debate, somebody quoted his book. What did you think about it? He said, that's the problem with writing books is they leave a paper trail.
I'm being nasty here,
Yeah.
but not too nasty.
Okay,
If his reason for writing the book was to settle it for himself, why did he publish it? You know,
Gotta make a living.
and that must be it.
I think he thinks there's a lot to offer in this book, and I think he thinks his view of Genesis is correct. It is what he's looking at, and it can be compatible with science.
yeah. I mean, I have a viewpoint on what I think he should have done with the manuscript. If he were to be assured, for example, 50 more years of life, if everything he's researched would be great to get some more feedback, send it out to more scholars. And it doesn't mean that they're going to change his mind, but he could say, I have considered this objection. And here's where I land. But you don't see a lot of that because there wasn't a lot of back and forth. You do see it, for example, in Stephen Meyer's book. Which one was it? One of Stephen Meyer's book, he did respond to objections in his revised edition. That's what you do get to do.
Well, I have it on good authority that Craig has Tom's book because I think Travis gave him a copy.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right, good. Did he read it?
Whether he read it or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
I saw him throw it in the
What?
tank.
No, he's a book geek. He keeps all books. Okay, yes, sir.
I guess I can't stay away from this idea when we talk about all the paleontological things, because I've heard it said so often. There'll be a big hubbub in the field, you know, about something and try to just lineage split or whatever. But it turns out you say, well, how much evidence do you actually have? Well, we have the shoebox here with bone fragments.
Yep.
Right? And, oh, not everybody agrees that all the fragments in here belong in this box. Some of them belong in that box over there.
Yep.
And yet we're doing the equivalent of the scholastic, benighted scholastic kind of angels dancing on the head of a pin, where we have almost no evidence whatsoever. Most of it has been created as a just so story.
Mhm.
So.
That's exactly it. With no strength of the evidence. But it's very cool because I think I still remain on this mission to get our young people to get science educated, STEM careers, go to the university, start producing books that come from the Christian worldview. And I do think there's a difference. And that is even independent of, you know, ideas I may have about this book. We need to come, if they came, to your point, from the sciences, and then now they're going to say something. Now that's going to be substantial. You know, I'm going to really think that's going to be more meaty. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. So where do I go? Oh, stop share. Okay. Oh, Sarah Polk's there. Raymond Turner. See you guys.
That's right. You got C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis is here. Whoa.
They heard that he heard you were done.
That was amazing.
Andrew, does anybody online have questions?
Unmute yourself.
Wayman, you're on mute if you want to talk.
It's a space bar.
We see a couple of other folks. I don't think they. I'm not hearing anything. Let me see the chat.
Did you hear us, Eric?
Yep, and no one's just saying anything. I guess no one online has any questions.
Okay,
Okay, that's it.
all right, let's have another round. I think one of the things I would say is that, if nothing else, William Lane Craig might have needed more data to make a conclusion.
Yeah.
And it's a hard lesson to learn. Some years ago, I wrote a thesis about where dark matter came from. Because I was convinced that, and you have to understand, part of the reason I was convinced, because I only wore at the time black socks. And so dark matter, I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, where could that possibly come from? Because nobody knew, right? And I said, well, it's obvious, it's from people's dryers. Dryers create this whirlpool which opens a tunnel in between, like a black hole. And but it only sucks in black socks, and they're transported out to the edge of the galaxy. And that's where your dark matter comes from. But then I found out that some people wore white socks. My whole theory went down the drain.
Okay.
So more data is always helpful when you're generating a theory. Let me close this in a prayer, and then if people want to talk amongst themselves, that's fine. Father God, thank you so much. Thank you for Mark and his presentation, and thank you for all these people who are really interested in knowing you better, your word better, and the world better, and knowing ways that we can share your love and your truth with people who may think that truth is really only found in science. In Jesus Christ, I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Following you.
Good night, Eric.